So I have been in the LEGO Beyblade community for not that long. However, despite that, I have gained a very good understanding on how to actually make these stupid things. And since I'm aware that a lot of you are beginners with LEGO Beyblade, don't really know how to start making them, so this video is going to be kind of a sort of a guide or tutorial on how to start making your own LEGO Beyblades. We're going to go over some of the best beginner methods for making them, and yeah, let's get to it. And again, these are on very, beginner-y things, so, like this 4x4 bracket kind of stuff and whatnot. So if you want to see a kind of tutorial on how to do stuff with more complex shapes, the things people actually subscribe to me for, then I'll do that when this video hits like 70 likes. Why not? We can do that. I think we can do that. All right. Let's, of course, begin with the main blade. We're going to kind of go with a three-part sort of system here. So we're going to begin with the main blade, since that's the main part of the Beyblade. And I would say that for beginners, 4x4 brackets are a must build. I know that a lot of people, including myself, are sort of trying to phase these out for the most part, but for beginners, they're still very good. You get a lot of studs for many different places to put contact points, and a lot of anti-studs in the center to put your top design on. There are different ways you can make 4x4 bracket bays, such as these kinds, which I use a lot. They use both these kinds of 1x2 brackets and these kinds of 1x2 brackets to create different leveling contact points. And then we also have double thick bays that make use of those 2x2 brackets. And these are kind of difficult to fit discs on, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Seems pretty simple, right? Well, there are a couple things that I see that people do with these things that I'm not the hugest fan of. I see a lot of people do something like this, where they'll make a 4x4 bracket, but it'll be incomplete. As you can see, there are still some flat sides of the 4x4 open, and we don't want that. This is because this is going to provide a lot of recoil, which I'm going to mention recoil a lot in this video. So I'll mention right now that recoil is pretty much the impact that a contact point can have on a Beyblade that can sometimes kill its own stamina. So like this giant wall has a lot of recoil. So yeah, this not only provides a lot of that, but it also limits the amount of contact points or pieces you can put for the contact points, because I can't put a part here anymore since there isn't a stud open there. Some people try to fix this issue by putting contact points that'll cover the whole thing, like this onto there, and that can kind of work, but it's a very fragile connection. Like this, that's not what I meant. This can be a very fragile connection too, since it's only 2 studs, unlike 4, which that isn't coming off anytime soon. So just always make sure that every single side of the 4x4 is covered up by a bracket of some kind. And I do know that some people do what I just said to save up brackets since they don't have a lot, but honestly, it's definitely worth it. Your bays will turn out so much better. Okay, so as I'm editing this video, I just remembered that I forgot to mention 1x4 bracket bays, which are pretty much 4x4 bracket bays, but people put 1x4s on the brackets to either make the bay larger, or if they have a single 1x2 here, they'll put this on there so they have more studs to work with. Don't do this. It won't fix the problem of being fragile if you're putting it on a single 1x2, and if you put it on any 4x4 bracket in general, it adds a lot of recoil because of these gaps, and it generally doesn't look that good. For the center right here, that's where you usually launch it. A lot of people do something like this. They'll put a 2x2 circle plate in the center, so when they launch their Beyblade or they put it onto the launcher, which I have a whole video on those, you can find it in the description below, it'll be very easy for the Beyblade to fall off since there isn't a lot of clutch power on these parts. You don't need to do that. You can launch bays just fine with normal anti-studs here. You don't need the weak clutch power of the 2x2 circle plate, but just to be safe and because it's beginner friendly, I do recommend using a 2x2 circle plate of some kind. And if you want to put like a chip or something in the center, make something that is like a 2x4, has 1 stud in the middle, will connect to the center of the bay, and there you go, chip. As for the top design itself, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do here, but generally speaking, something that's not too cluttered and doesn't look like those rocks at the bottom of a fishbowl will do just fine. Now let's move on to the contact points themselves, which usually contact points will correspond to one of the 4 main types in Beyblade. So let's begin with attack type shapes. Attack type shapes will generally have a large sweeping blade that ends in a larger contact point, like on here. Some people will do these large blades on all 4 sides, so they have 4 of the same blades on each of the sides. But I found that having 2 smaller blades and 2 larger blades on opposing sides will have a lot of really powerful attack power for some reason. I don't know why, but it works. Something you don't want is for this to be the main contact point that comes into contact, since again, this has a lot of recoil. And I know that attack types generally have some amount of recoil, but if it's something like this, it can kill the Bey's own stamina, not only the opponent's Beyblade. It can hit the other Bey, and then it'll just explode. I don't know, and you don't want that. Just keep in mind that attack is recoil, but not all recoil is attack. I know that there's some attackers that have like one main blade, like an Excalibur, like just some, slopes or something like that on one side, and that can work fine too. Let's move on to stamina types, since those are going to be very easy to explain. For a stamina type, usually use parts that are very round and smooth. It'll give the Beyblade less air resistance, blah blah blah. Basically, they spin for a very long time, and there's nothing else I need to explain about them. Defense types are a little bit trickier to explain because there's a lot of different ways you can go about defense. I'd say that the two main types are the tanky kinds of defense types and counter-attack like defense types. For the tanky kinds, they're somewhat smooth, again, like stamina types, and they're also quite heavy, and they can, just eat attacks really well. Like if another Bey goes in for an attack, and it just won't move at all. But then we have counter-attack based defense types that are also quite round, but have a very minor amount of recoil. Not that much to the point where it'll kill its own stamina, but like one of the studs on a plate is enough. These studs will come in contact, and not only will it stand its ground, but it'll also be able to attack the other Bey as well, so it can get some KOs. So yeah, those are the two main types of defense types that you can see. Now let's move on to balance types. This is a tricky subject. Balance types aren't always a mix of all three types. They can be a mix between attack and defense, attack and stamina, or stamina and defense, and then sometimes they can be all three. For any of the balance types that include a mix of attack, you generally want something that is pretty aggressive, but also is a little bit round, so it can provide some decent attacks while also having good stamina. Or defense, whichever you're going for. Then for a mix of stamina and defense, which I don't have that many great examples for, so I just threw in Spriggan here. Something that's round. Yeah, honestly, describing defense and stamina mix balance types are kind of hard. So I guess just like combine the main rules of both, having something that's very round and smooth, but also kind of tanky. You can also make your balance types be able to switch between these sort of different types before you battle. For instance, my Century Barbarian has that. It has a balance mode where the blades are evened out like this, but it also has an attack mode where the blades are on the main two sides here. So yeah, as you can see, balance types are kind of a tricky subject, but just something that's a nice, balance between round and also aggressive will work generally fine. So that's about it for the main blade, so let's move on to the middle part, which will generally be a disc of some kind. Follow the exact same rules that I just said. I do see a lot of people cut down on brackets whenever they make discs, and I gotta say, don't do that. But I can understand that at this point, you probably used up a lot of your brackets, so are there any alternatives? Well, there's two that I found. The first alternative are these pieces. We have this 6x6 circle, and these two pieces that can create sort of an octagon shape. These are very good discs. These discs are great for those double thick bays that I mentioned before, since they won't be that thick when you put on the bay, as opposed to if you were to use like this, that is overkill. You can also add little variations to these parts, such as plates or something, to kind of give them a bit more of a unique shape. But once again, the rules apply. Don't have this as your initial contact point. That'll provide a lot of recoil. But I can understand that a lot of people might not have these kinds of pieces, so what's my last resort? Well, bringing back Metal Fight. Metal Fight Beyblades had tracks, which these are the middle part for those bays, and they pretty much changed the height of the Beyblade, and that can be easily emulated with Lego. You can emulate tracks pretty easily just by stacking up different amounts of plates on top of each other, and then you can just stick them at the bottom of the bay. So that's about it for the middle part. I know that making discs or tracks can be a bit difficult since they're kind of the least important part of the bay, but all I can say is experiment until you find something that works. And no, I'm not going to talk about using actual burst discs. That's a Lauren's thing, and you can just watch that video. Now let's move on to the tips, and this should be the easiest thing to explain. For attack type tips, something that's round and flat like this will work very well. It'll be very aggressive in the stadium. You can get some good hits in. And of course, there are some variations, such as using gear pieces and other stuff. For defense type tips, be mature when I say this, balls. Ball tips are great since they don't move around nearly as much as the tack-type tips, and they have a good grip on the stadium since there's a lot of surface area. For stamina tips, they're usually sharp tips that have a lot of stamina, obviously, and they spin around for a very long time, but they can get KO'd pretty easily since there's like no grip on the stadium. And then we have balance type tips. Oh god, I have to talk about balance types again. There are balance type tips that are usually a mix between, you know, all of the main types, such as this, a boat stud, which has good aggression, but can also sometimes be pretty docile. But then we have tips that can switch between those two, such as Merge here, which has a rubber ring that can hit the stadium and then speed up, but then it has a round tip in the center that is much more docile. Now let's talk about putting the stuff together. You take your main blade thing, you put on your center part, whether it be a track or a disc, then put your tip on. Beyblade. Don't make this specific one. If you want your Beyblades to burst, then having a weaker connection between the blade and the disc, or the disc and the tip, will help out quite a bit, but make sure it's not too loose. That could be bad. My last tip that I can give is to just experiment with stuff, since that's the best way I've found to make unique designs with something like this. You know, get a little silly with it, make weird contact points, and just experiment with different parts when it comes to blades, or making discs, or making tips, like whatever. Just use different parts, make sure it doesn't look like something like this. That's not good. But generally speaking, if you followed most of the things that I said, you'll be very happy with your LEGO Beyblade designs. That should be about it for now. If there's anything that you guys want to recommend to anyone watching this video, or if there's something I missed, which, let's be honest, I absolutely missed something, put it in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video, and tune in next time when I teach you guys how to build a LEGO Honda Civic. Wario, there, you happy? You happy now, fat quat?